All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And Merry Christmas to all my brothers and sisters out there. Today is Christmas Eve 2024. And we're going to be doing the ultimate overview on the evolution of Santa Claus. I've been watching a few of the videos, and like my friend Technicore Graphics out there was saying, a lot of Santa hate out there this year. And I've been seeing this is quite a prominent conversation in Christian circles around the potentially Christianization of a pagan holiday. We're going to be addressing all this. And I would argue that the more you dive into it, it's Turquoise actually was the person who was saying that a lot of Christmas hate out there. Shout out to Turquoise. That it's actually surprisingly Christian. Obviously, everybody here is already going to be familiar with St. Nicholas of Myra. I put a whole document together. To me, this is the ultimate overview. Here, I'll pull it up for you guys. We're going to go through it today, and I got a bunch of fun videos that we're going to go through as well. I would argue this is the ultimate overview in regard to the evolution and the origins of Santa Claus. I have a whole section on here going over the life and the importance of St. Nicholas, but then we get into the Dutch Sinterklaas tradition, because really when we're talking about Santa Claus, we're talking about an amalgamation of a lot of different things that have come about. Santa Claus is obviously a sort of Englandization of St. Nicholas, coming out of Sinterklaas, which is where that word comes from. But it's also an amalgamation of the English medieval tradition of the personification of the Christmas season known as Father Christmas. And yes, there were Nordic, Germanic folklore traditions regarding to the Yule celebration. And there's only a few kind of rudimentary connections there that we'll discuss. But really, when we start to think of Santa Claus as he exists today, as this big, round, jolly individual bringing toys for all the kids, it's very much an American creation. And we're going to be discussing Thomas Nast's illustration in Harper's Weekly magazine in 1863 being really the first point in which the contemporary Santa Claus is really articulated, and how this became incredibly influential then for Haddon Sundblom in regards to the Coca-Cola campaigns. So when we think then of the contemporary Santa Claus, obviously we're in the Christmas season. All the advertisements have Santa Claus on them. We actually have to point to Coca-Cola as the main inspiration for a lot of today's depictions of Santa Claus. And so I have a little bit of an overview on how all this stuff got amalgamated together. And then I put together a timeline, scanning over multiple documents and articles, a timeline on this evolution, beginning with the birth of St. Nicholas through medieval Europe, 11th century introduction to Western Europe, 13th, 15th century Christianization of winter festivals, Protestant Reformation, because interestingly enough, Martin Luther, as you guys know, during the Protestant Reformation of 1517, he wasn't so fond of venerating the saints. And typically during this more ancient and early medieval period, the exchanging of gifts and stuff often occurred on St. Nicholas Day, December 6th. However, I have evidence, and even St. John Chrysostom, Golden Mouth himself, referenced in 386 that Christians were celebrating the birth of Christ on December 25th. Obviously, we have the differences between the Julian and the Gregorian calendars as Orthodox. So depending on which jurisdiction you're in, we actually celebrate Christmas on technically a different day based on the Gregorian calendar. But December 25th had already been a sort of historical celebration for Christians regarding the incarnation of Christ due to the celebration of the Annunciation on March 25th. So you fast forward 9 months, you get December 25th. Also, it was very common for in the Old Testament, it was common in the ancient world because of the round numbers that was used in the Old Testament to describe people's ages, such as Moses being 120 years old, that people believed that the holier you were, the more likely you were to die on the same day that you were born. And so December 25th obviously then had another significant importance there. And obviously there's the symbolism. So I remember as my new age faith, and we're going to get into the psychedelic shaman clause argument, the astrotheology, right? Sol Invictus, Mithra. This was all has to do with veneration of the winter solstice. Well, I actually have some interesting information to present to you guys as well, that celebrations like the conquering of the sun by Sol Invictus during the Roman Empire, we have no reference to that being celebrated on December 25th until the 4th century. And based on what I've been looking into, there's a lot more evidence to argue that Saturnalia and Sol Invictus, these were actually moved to compete with the burgeoning Christian communities that were thriving at this point, and so many pagans were converting to the Christian faith that they moved their celebrations towards the 25th. Now, you look at Saturnalia, it actually is celebrated on December 17th. Sol Invictus, we have ancient writings that describe it in August, describe it in October, and describe it in early December. And it isn't, as I said, till the 4th century when we see people like, Julian the Apostate lament the fact that it's these darn Christians that are eroding pagan celebrations. So Roman temple worship was already in massive decline by the 4th century. And this was one of the reasons why they actually deliberately moved the date on some of these celebrations. So anyways, regarding my article here, and then we get into Clement Clark Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, now often understood as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," the poem that he wrote, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." We're going to read it. I got the whole thing right here. We're going to go through this whole thing. But this was clearly, when we read A Visit from St. Nicholas, now this is one of the first places in which the reindeer is specifically named by Moore, but he is clearly referencing St. Nicholas of Myra as the Santa Claus figure. And you have, like I said, this amalgamation of St. Nicholas. We're going to get into his life and why he's important as a giver of gifts, why he's the patron saint of children and sailors. But St. Nicholas is an amalgamation, or let me say, Santa Claus is an amalgamation of St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Yuletide, Yule celebrations from some of the Nordic Germanic regions. And it's actually much more Christian than we would ever think. So I've been just watching some of these videos. They were kind of circulating on X and online of these Christians talking about how do not celebrate Christmas, do not put up a Christmas tree, right? The Christmas tree is pagan tree worship. Well, I actually have found some evidence that's to the contrary. I found descriptions of St. Boniface when he destroyed the tree that was dedicated to Thor by some Germanic pagans, and that there was a Western Christian tradition. So not so much in the East, obviously most of us are Orthodox, not so much in the East, but there was a Western Christian tradition of what's called the paradise tree. And the paradise tree was putting up a tree on the day of the Feast of Adam and Eve, which is the 24th, today, Christmas Eve. And this was reminiscent of the tree within paradise and symbolized this full historical return back to the incarnation of Christ, returning us back to paradise itself. And so even the Christmas tree, interestingly enough, isn't entirely pagan. Now, we are going to see that there was the utilization of trees and various winter rites and stuff like that. But I would argue when we look at Santa Claus and the celebration of Christian Christmas, that it's like the word concept fallacy. Just because somebody used a tree or somebody had made reference to this or that doesn't mean that the meaning of it is limited to that specific interpretation. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about like astrotheology. I mean, when I was big in my new age and watching things regarding, Jordan Maxwell and Michael Caesarian on how the 25th, it all has to do with sun worship and that Christians were just adopting a pagan ritual. Not really, not so much. And I think what's more interesting, and I have a whole section here in this article right at the end describing the arguments for any sort of pagan evidence is an adoption of sort of Christian celebrations themselves. We don't have any references of some of these religious rites being specifically on the 25th. Now, like I said, Saturnalia was moved a few different times. I mean, Saturnalia ended on December 17th. Sol Invictus was moved a few times. So anyways, very interesting stuff. But we're going to be diving into all this. And I got tons of fun videos we'll be watching, looking at Howard Sundblom and how he influenced, again, the modern creation of Santa Claus and all that different stuff. So smash that like. If you guys want to support my work, please do so using the Streamlabs or Dono Chat link. And if you really want to support using YouTube, please use YouTube. Send in a super chat, or if you're feeling generous this Christmas season, it is Christmas Eve. Please give some COTEL Crew memberships to everybody. They would greatly appreciate that. And so I'm going to make a little bit of a goal real quick. So if you guys, again, we're not going to be here too long today. I don't want to expect this to be a 3-hour stream or anything. I just wanted to hop on here and kind of discuss this topic with you guys. And I put this document together. It's 13 pages, goes over the differences between the Julian Gregorian calendar, some of the pagan influence, the historical timeline of Santa's evolution, and an overview of the life and miracles of St. Nicholas. So smash that like. We're going to dive into all this stuff, guys. And I think before we even dive into that, why don't we watch one of our videos? So here's the first video. And we're going to be getting in. This one's describing how Coca-Cola took over Santa Claus. And then I'm going to introduce a lot more of this content to you guys and move through our presentation today. And I got to say, first of all, a major thank you to Emmanuel. He throws in $5 on Dono Chat and says, I may not be able to watch live, but thanks for all the continuous work. Well, thank you so much, Emmanuel. Merry Christmas to you and your family. Hope you guys are celebrating today and have a wonderful time together. God bless you, bro. Okay. So let's play this video. This is a quick little video I found. It's about 5 minutes, 6 minutes on how Coca-Cola took over Santa Claus.
Every year during the holidays, I can guarantee that all of you will see Santa Claus with the Coke in his hands. Whether he's on a billboard, a poster, magazine, or commercial, Santa Claus and Coke always make sure to have a huge presence during Christmas time. The full story between Father Christmas and Coke is fascinating. Some have assumed that Santa wears red because of Coke, and some even think that Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus. While those rumors are false, there is no doubt that Coke shaped the modern image of Santa Claus into what we know him as today, and have commercialized him like no other brand has done before. And today, I'm covering the full story between Coke and Santa, from the origins of Santa himself to how one Coca-Cola artist completely transformed Santa into what he is today. To understand how Coke and Santa became such a huge part of the holidays, we need to know where Santa Claus came from in the first place, which takes us back over 2,000 years to the 4th century. During this time, this is what Santa Claus looked like. While obviously lacking all the key features of our version of Santa, these religious depictions of Santa all had the same role as him: giving out presents. The first story of Santa involved a 4th century Greek hero named Saint Nicholas, a Turkish bishop that gave secret gifts to the poor and did other good deeds like saving single women from being prostitutes. Over centuries, the image of Santa transformed drastically, but it wasn't until the 1860s that our version of Santa started appearing in history, all thanks to two people, Clement Moore and Thomas Nast. First, we have Clement Moore. Clement was a poet from New York City who wrote the world-famous "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem. In the poem, he described Santa as a chubby, jolly old elf with a white beard and dressed in all fur. Sound familiar? However, our standard view of Santa wouldn't start to take form until the late 1860s, when Thomas Nast, a Civil War cartoonist, started drawing his depiction of Father Christmas. He was known for creating political cartoons for a newspaper called Harper's Weekly. In these cartoons, he would consistently include his depiction of Santa based on Clement's poem. His most famous and well-known cartoon he drew of Santa was this one called Merry Old Santa Claus. And out of every single Santa Claus picture out there, this one resonated with people the most. and brands took note of it. Surprisingly, Coca-Cola wasn't the first brand to use Santa in their ads. The first trace of Santa in any form of advertising dates back to 1868, when the U.S. Confection Company used him in an ad for sugar plums. Then in 1885, he appeared in an ad for Ivory soap. But the most notable use of Santa came in 1915, when a company called White Rock Beverages became the first drink brand to use him in advertising. And it would be these ads from White Rock that would inspire Coca-Cola to use Santa in their ads. The question is, how did Coca-Cola become the one brand to be so intertwined with Santa? To find the answer, we need to take a look at Coke during the chilly winters of the 1930s. At the time, Coke was facing a major issue during the holiday season. What was that issue? Well, they couldn't sell Coke during the winter. Coke was only known for being a summer beverage, so when the holidays arrived, their sales slumped drastically because a cold Coke didn't seem appetizing to consumers during the winter. So, how are they going to convince people to drink soda during the holidays? The answer? Santa Claus. In 1931, Coke's advertising executive set out to find an artist that could create a wholesome, lovable, and symbolic image of Santa for their ads. And he struck gold on his search when he discovered Haddon Sundblom, a talented artist who would eventually transform the image of Santa into what we know him as today. Coca-Cola paid Haddon $1,000 to create an oil painting of Santa for Coke to use in their ads. He took inspiration from Thomas Nast's cartoons and created this painting of him titled My Hat's Off. He had perfectly captured everything Coke wanted for their Santa. The twinkling eyes, the rosy cheeks, the round belly, and the merry grin were spot on. He came off as warm, gentle, friendly, and cheerful. All traits that Coca-Cola's brand stood for. Needless to say, Coke loved Haddon Santa. Coke took Haddon Santa and used it in a magazine ad in 1931. And Coke didn't know it at the time, but this one advertisement would not only change the modern image of Santa, but would forever intertwine Coca-Cola with Santa Claus. Readers of the magazine absolutely adored Haddon Santa, and as a result, Coke actually saw an increase in their winter sales. So, for the next 33 winters, Coke continuously paid Haddon to make Santa Claus ads during the holiday season. Using his neighbor and himself as a model, Haddon would paint his version of Santa in many different fun situations, like delivering toys, greeting children that stayed up to meet him, and raiding refrigerators at numerous homes. Santa was also seen holding bottles of Coke, drinking Coke, and receiving Coke as gifts. Coca-Cola's winter sales continued to skyrocket. But at the same time, they were completely changing American culture. Coke's magazine ads, billboards, and store displays were, for many Americans, their primary exposure to the modern image of Santa Claus. Sundblom's paintings fiercely captured the public's imagination. And as a result, millions of Americans started to associate Haddon's paintings with what they thought Santa should look like. And sure enough, everyone started to agree that Santa was a jolly, fat, and red suit wearing guy who gave out presents. And of course, loved to drink Coke. The cultural impact of Haddon's paintings was so big that Santa developed a fan base of observant fans. For example, they noticed the time when Santa's belt buckle was strapped in the wrong direction, and also the time that Santa was missing his wedding ring from Mrs. Claus. Children even started to leave out Coke at night on Christmas Eve, all because of Haddon's ads. Haddon would create his final version of Santa Claus in 1964. But our story doesn't end there. Coca-Cola continued to create Santa ads in the same exact style as Haddon, but just with different artists. And because of this decades-long tradition of using Santa in their Christmas commercials, Coke continued to cement the idea that they were a necessity during the holidays. Many brands still use Coke's depiction of Santa in their ads to this day. And it's no doubt that Coke completely changed the way we feel about Christmas. While Coke didn't invent Santa, it is certain that Coca-Cola not only changed the image of Santa Claus forever, but commercialized him in a way no other brand has ever done before. Every year.
So that's a little bit of the overview, but today we're going to be discussing, in addition, how St. Nicholas to Coca-Cola's 1931 ads by Haddon Sundblom, laying out this new jolly old man, has a place in the North Pole filled with elves making toys for all the children. Well, that's what we're going to be going over today. And as you can see, I got tons of things to look at. We're going to be checking out also Thomas Nast's first depiction of Santa Claus, which is right down here. Look, check this out. This is the first cartoon that he drew. Now, this was Union propaganda during the U.S. Civil War, and they were trying to promote or propagandize people to support the Union over the Confederates. And here is a depiction of Santa Claus. You can see he's kind of dressed in a furry American flag type suit. I think there is a colored version, although this is not. This higher quality is black and white. And he's laying out toys, and all the Union soldiers are gathered around him to hear him speak and tell stories. So this was, and this is 1863. 1863 was when this was published. And here's Haddon Sunbloom. We'll discuss him a little bit more. I got a whole section on him in my article. This is a nice little video I found. I don't know who this guy is, Dr. Roy Casagranda. No idea, but I found this video was circulating the intertubes, and we're going to play that as well. Here's a little something I found on Christmas trees. Now, this is the Encyclopedia Britannica's website, and at no point does it talk about it being a specifically pagan tradition of bringing in these Christmas trees. Now, I'm going to get into the psychedelic interpretation, because after I got out of the whole astrotheology thing, I was convinced. I heard Terrence McKenna one time talk about the relationship of Santa Claus to what he believed was shamanic use of Amanita muscaria mushrooms. He pointed to the colors of Santa Claus being red and white, being indicative of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, that he lives towards the North Pole, checking out Arctic shamanism, Eskimo people towards the north, specifically around like Finland area, I think is where these was our first research, anthropographic research into shamanism. And they would find these red and white mushrooms under coniferous trees. So like pine trees, things like that, pull them out of the ground. You have to lay them on the tree so that they can dry, because they contain muscimol, which is a toxin, so that they're much easily digestible. So you have the decorating of the Christmas tree with the red and white mushroom, right? This was McKenna's take. And I have a video we're going to check out here promoting that whole idea right here. But I'm going to lay out what their argument is and then demonstrate how it really doesn't suffice to explain the whole phenomenon of Santa Claus. Anyways, so they would point to these Amanita muscaria mushrooms, laying them on the Christmas tree. This is a form of Christmas tree decoration, and that the mushrooms growing under them are the understanding of the gifts that we're receiving, and that the shaman would jump down these chimneys of these igloos to give people these Amanita muscaria mushrooms, which then they would celebrate. See, not much of a child focus there, but we'll get to the whole thing here. Reindeers are animals that are known to actually ingest Amanita muscaria mushrooms. So it's very common for shamans in the Arctic area to actually drink the urine of reindeers, because many of the toxins have already been expelled, or at least filtered by the reindeer themselves. And so flying reindeers, Amanita muscaria mushrooms, red and white imagery. And then, of course, the elves, if anybody has got into deep inebriated states, that it's very common for people to claim that they encounter small creatures, elves, leprechauns, gnomes, these types of things. And so the elves building all the toys for Santa Claus, this is all part of the shamanic tradition, right? However, as we'll look at, and I can show here, we do not have historical evidence to actually argue that this was a annual celebration that was replete with Christmas trees and all this different stuff, or decorating themselves in red and white. You can find images of like kind of Arctic shaman-like people dressed like an Amanita muscaria mushroom. But like what you can see here is I was looking at the liturgical colors of the church. And of course, during the season for the nativity, we always wear red. And most of the origins regarding Christmas and Christmas celebration, I keep finding Christian origins, despite the people who continually argue for it being a pagan celebration. So we're going to discuss all this. I have a video of Father Peter Heers discussing why he thinks kind of the modern commercialization of Santa Claus and divorcing it from the reality of St. Nicholas of Myra is really a kind of satanic secular force that we need to watch out for. So I'll be playing that video as well for you guys. And then I found a good little video on Dead Moroz, which is sort of the Slavic Santa Claus. And this little section here, I found this Wes Huff video from 3 years ago, and we're just going to play this one little section where he goes over, again, the historical use of Christmas trees, which I thought was very interesting from a Christian perspective. We'll be checking that out as well. And, you know, we're going to be discussing Santa Claus from the Dutch tradition, who, when you look at Santa Claus, he was still explicitly St. Nicholas. So he was not this pagan wizard-like figure. He was explicitly Saint Nicholas, patron saint of children. This is where Christmas's focus on children and gift giving, it all originates from Saint Nicholas. I was looking at some of the factors, like where do we get things from certain people? With Saint Nicholas, we get gift giving as a central focus. Now, it was traditionally done on December 6th, his feast day, although there was a tradition on the birth of Christ, celebrated on December 25th. And we can get into the whole winter solstice, light coming into the darkness, 25th being one of the darkest days of the year, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, the sun doesn't move. And so on the 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, symbolizing renewal, symbolizing life. And as I said, there's not a whole lot of evidence for actual pagan celebration on this day, which to me makes it even more exciting, because that symbolism of the cosmic happenings of the sun itself rising and giving warmth, and the days are supposed to get longer. That's what Christ's birth is. It is the light entering into the world. It's the light of God. It's the uncreated light taking on human form. And that makes it even more special. So even the fact that Christmas is celebrated 9 months after the Annunciation, March 25th, doesn't mean that Christians placed it on the 25th to celebrate the winter solstice. I think not. Rather, this winter solstice is reflecting the theological legitimacy and literal understanding of the incarnation of Christ. We also, again, the focus on children, charity giving, doing charity work during the Christmas season, all associated with St. Nicholas. Miracles, the sort of mystical dimension of Christmas, is again associated with St. Nicholas and some of the miracles that are ascribed to him. And stockings. So the use of stockings, I was listening to one Protestant talking about how they don't do stockings, again, thinking that this was some sort of pagan celebration. Well, we're going to get into the giving of golden coins by St. Nicholas to a father who had 3 daughters, and he was in financial hardship. He didn't have much money. And so he was worried about the fact that he didn't have a dowry for his daughters to get married to good men. And St. Nicholas was aware of this, and there was a rumor that he was going to be forced to offer his daughters into prostitution because he, as a father, did not have enough money to provide a dowry for them to get married. And that St. Nicholas came for the first daughter, the eldest daughter, and put gold coins in her shoes, which is next to the window. Well, he subsequently did this for the second daughter and the third daughter. And on the third daughter, the father caught St. Nicholas doing this and just gave him thanks, appreciation, and told him how wonderful this was because of the lives that his daughters were going to be able to live. And this is the reason why we hang stockings. It has to do with the shoes or the socks that these daughters were given golden coins by St. Nicholas from. So hanging stockings is actually an explicitly Christian tradition rooted in the charity of St. Nicholas, not some pagan tradition itself. So we're going to be, again, looking at all this different stuff. We got some super chats that were sent in. Shout out to Ticky Tack, throws in $20, says, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you, Ticky Tack. God bless you. Thank you very much for the support. Our brother Soong Kim throws in $5. Thank you so much, Soong. Merry Christmas to you. Hope you're staying safe in the demon city of LA. God bless you, brother. Wish you the best. Austin DeTulio throws in $5. Says, Merry Christmas to all of you and your families. Christ is born. Glorify him. Amen to that. So thank you so much, Austin. God bless you, brother. And again, Merry Christmas to everybody. This is Christmas Eve. I hope you guys be able to spend time with your families and loved ones today. Before we go any further, let me do some quick housekeeping. And if you would like to support my work and things that I'm doing, or you want to get access to my ultimate overview on the origins of Santa Claus for your Christmas celebration, please become a website member. It's only $5 a month or 2 months free if you purchase for a year. You can get access to all my documents here. We just put another one up. There we go. Orthodox Fools for Christ. And we'll have the one that I just put together up after the stream's over on the website. But if you want to get second half videos, get access to all my show notes, that's available right here at davidpatrickcarey.com/register and become a Oh, actually, that's the wrong link. Just it's right here. /register. Become a website member. You can get access to all that. Also, if anybody wants to set up a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here, and we can get into a private Zoom meeting to discuss anything your heart desires. And if you have a stream you would like to sponsor, we have a handful of streams that'll be coming up. The next one is going to be on Scottish common sense realism. Shout out to AC for sponsoring that stream. We'll be covering Hume and the Scottish realism school of common sense in opposition to Hume's skepticism. That'll be a very philosophically oriented stream. And what do we have? We have another one on Orthodoxy and Confucianism. We have one coming on the elders in the end times. This is a book newly translated from Romanian saints and elders discussing Orthodox eschatology, prophecies, and such like that. Antichrist, all types of topics in this book. You got Mark of the Beast, King of the Jews, the mass media, the Antichrist, symbols of the Antichrist, Russia and the Antichrist, all types of stuff. So we'll be doing that. That's another sponsored stream that's going to be coming here soon. But if you want to sponsor a stream, feel free to sign up. Would greatly appreciate that. Also, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, check out orthodoxdepot.com, orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL, COTEL. You'll get 10% off. You'll be able to help me out as well as a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest. So that kind of takes care of that. Again, Merry Christmas to all you guys. Really glad you were able to be here today. We'll spend a little time together. I promise we're not going to be here too long so everybody can get back to their family. But let's go over my document real quick, and then we'll watch all these videos, and then we'll have a much better understanding of everything. So the origins of Santa Claus, as I said, Santa as a contemporary figure is really an amalgamation shaped by a rich tapestry of historical, religious, and folklore traditions. And then below is a detailed overview. So number one, first and foremost, is our beloved St. Nicholas of Myra. And so he was a 4th century Christian bishop, renowned for his generosity, piety, and miracles. I have a little bit of a discussion on his early life. So his birth and family. St. Nicholas was born around 270 CE in Patara, a city in the Roman province of Lycia, to wealthy Christian parents. His parents, who died in an epidemic when he was young, left him a substantial inheritance, which he chose to use for charitable purposes. And this is where he got the gold coins that he's going to be giving as dowries to these young women. We're going to read that right here. Religious devotion. From an early age, Nicholas demonstrated deep piety. According to one account, he began fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays while still an infant, refusing to nurse on those days. Now, I'll let you make your mind up on that. He later entered the priesthood, dedicating his life to serving God and others, eventually becoming the Bishop of Myra. Nicholas's appointment to Bishop of Myra is surrounded by a miraculous story. It is said that the clergy of Myra could not agree on who should be their next bishop. One of the elders suggested that they choose the first priest to enter the church the following morning. Nicholas, known for his humility and prayerful life, was the priest and was chosen to lead the diocese. Now, here's a few stories of his miracles. Is the dowries of the 3 sisters, as I already mentioned. A poor man in Nicholas' town could not afford dowries for his 3 daughters, leaving them vulnerable to a life of servitude or prostitution. Learning the plight, Nicholas secretly threw bags of gold coins in their home on 3 separate occasions. In one version, the coins landed in stockings or shoes left by the fire to dry, leading to the tradition of hanging stockings at Christmas, as I said. The saving of the innocent. This was another miracle associated with St. Nicholas. Nicholas is credited with saving 3 innocent men who were falsely condemned to death. He intervened as the executioner was about to carry out the sentence, demanding justice and exposing the corruption behind the charges. Another miracle, the miracle of the grain. During the famine in Myra, Nicholas persuaded sailors from a grain ship destined for the emperor in Constantinople to unload part of their cargo to feed the starving population. Miraculously, the ship's cargo was not diminished when it reached its final destination. This is partly why he's, and also this miracle of rescuing sailors, why he's the patron saint of sailors as well. Nicholas is often depicted as the patron saint of sailors because of a famous miracle in which he appeared during a storm to calm the sea and gave a group of sailors in distress. The resurrecting of murdered boys. One of the most famous legends tells of 3 boys who were murdered by an innkeeper and hidden in barrels of brine. Nicholas discovered the crime through divine revelation and resurrected the boys, demonstrating his role as a protector of children. And then the defense of orthodoxy at the Council of Nicaea. One of the more iconic elements of St. Nicholas, right, is when he slaps Arius in the face at the council, which is always phenomenal. Last year, I mentioned that I played St. Nicholas. So my parish, whenever we don't have Santa Claus come, we have St. Nicholas come, and he speaks to the children and passes out gold coins that are really chocolate coins wrapped in a gold foil. But Nicholas is said to have attended the First Council of Nicaea in 325, where he ardently defended the Orthodox doctrine against the Arian heresy, which denied the full divinity of Christ. A well-known story claims that Nicholas slapped Arius, the heretical priest, during the heated debate. This act led to his temporary imprisonment, but he was later vindicated through miraculous visions. The importance in orthodoxy: St. Nicholas is a model of virtue. He's a worker of miracles, protector of the vulnerable, and it obviously has liturgical significance. He's the patron saint of children, sailors and fishermen, the poor and the needy, merchants, prisoners, and various cities and nations. Specifically, Moscow and Russia, I think, is dedicated to St. Nicholas, and parts of Greece and Italy. And of course, we already know his feast day is December 6th. Now, the next amalgamation, how St. Nicholas eventually becomes Coca-Cola's 1931 Santa Claus, is the mixture with the Dutch tradition of Sinterklaas. A Dutch iteration of St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas, retained many of the saint's characteristics, but is blended with local folklore. Sinterklaas is depicted as an elderly man in a bishop's robe, still explicitly Christian, carrying a staff and riding a white horse. He is accompanied by Black Pete, and we're going to see some of the depictions. And apparently social correctness, political correctness, social justice, all these different things have affected. So some of the Danish actually are not as enthusiastic about their celebration of Sinterklaas because of his black-faced Moroccan helper who helps him pass out gifts. So not an elf yet. We don't have the legend of the elf in Santa Claus yet. We have Black Pete, the little Moroccan helper of Sinterklaas. And he's a controversial servant figure who assists in distributing gifts. And again, feast day was still December 6th. Then we have the development of a medieval English tradition where we had a figure who personifies the entire Christmas season, referred to as Father Christmas. And like I said, it's rooted in medieval traditions. We really do not have a written record of him until the 15th century. So later 1400s, we have a actual historical record of the writings about this mythological figure, Father Christmas. So Father Christmas was initially associated with merrymaking and feasting during Christmastide rather than gift giving. And by the 17th century, Father Christmas was depicted as a bearded man dressed in green robes, not red and white, embodying the spirit of cheer and goodwill. This is where the Amanita muscaria psychedelic theory on the origins of Santa Claus kind of fall off, because red and white are the two colors that are used, at least within the Orthodox tradition, I assume parts of the Catholic tradition, during the Nativity fast. So those colors already have a religious and theological importance that predate any sort of pagan evidence we have of some of these other holidays. Also, like it shows here, many times they were depicted wearing green. So this idea that the entire understanding of Santa Claus comes from shamanistic practices around the Arctic doesn't make sense, because why would all these other traditions, both in Nordic, English, Danish depictions, also demonstrate them wearing green coats sometimes? Doesn't make sense. Now, here is some of the pagan elements, and this was the most that I could find that were explicit, that were factual, and that is the Nordic and Germanic tradition of Odin and his kind of veneration, that it's associated with Yule and had influence on Santa's nocturnal journey. During the wild hunt, Odin rode an 8-legged horse, where maybe we get the 8 reindeer, splenere across the skies, rewarding or punishing individuals based on their behavior. And children left offerings of food, which parallels the tradition of leaving milk and cookies for Santa. And so, one of these things that I kept finding in regards to the pagan elements is that there was much more of an emphasis on punishing those who acted badly throughout the year. And this is in alpine figures such as Krampus and Beesnickel, and other companions or enforcers of St. Nicholas introduced the idea of punishing naughty children. So we can see with St. Nicholas, before the blending of maybe or the incorporation of that pagan element, there is no understanding of punishing those who do bad. It's about giving, it's about charity, and it's specifically focused on children. But this element gets in through pagan enculturation. And I don't know if you guys saw the recent, was it a Netflix movie, Red One, which has The Rock as like the bodyguard of Santa Claus, and it has a prominent position for Krampus inside that one. And Krampus does look like a demonic devil in the movie The Red One. I watched it with my wife. So Krampus is a sort of demonic figure that was used and incorporated from some of the pagan traditions, and acted as a sort of enforcer or punisher for anybody who acted incorrectly throughout the year. And then the most important part right here is 5, the American evolution. And so with all the Dutch settlers coming to America, they brought the Santa Claus tradition, which became in American English Santa Claus. And the fusion began when Dutch traditions were adopted and adapted to other ethnic groups. So then we have Clement Clark Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas in 1823. This is the poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And I have it here, and we're going to read it, but it is explicitly referring to St. Nicholas as a Christian bishop, with a little bit of elements like it's in this poem where we have the first naming of the 8 reindeer. And so, also known as the "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," this poem solidified many modern attributes: a jolly, plump figure dressed in fur, a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer, and delivering toys through chimneys. Then we have Thomas Nat's illustration, which I showed you earlier. The 19th century political cartoonist created iconic images of Santa for Harper's Weekly, and Nat established Santa's workshop at the North Pole, his list of naughty and nice children, and his red suit. And of course, Coca-Cola, by the 1930s, artist Haddon Sundblom popularized the modern image of Santa, a rotund, jolly man in a red suit with white trim, cheerful and approachable. This image became globally iconic, and this leads to the commercialization and the global spread of the now mythical figure of Santa Claus. Santa Claus today is a universal symbol of Christmas, transcending his Christian roots, unfortunately, to become a secular commercial figure. His association with gift giving, family gatherings, and festive cheer appears to diverse audiences worldwide, specifically secular people and secular families. I know people who are certainly not Christian who still put up Christmas trees and stockings and give gifts and celebrate this sort of new secular American Christmas, which is now a global celebration in many ways. So the timeline on this development, this actually took me a little bit to put together. So 270 AD. We have the birth and death of St. Nicholas. So through the 4th and 10th centuries, spread the cult of St. Nicholas. The veneration of St. Nicholas expanded across the Byzantine Empire and into Western Europe. Stories of his generosity, such as dowries for the 3 poor sisters, became emblematic of his character and protector and benefactor. Now, I was reading in regards to Santa Claus. It came to the Netherlands and Denmark through Spain. And so there's an association of giving like mandarin oranges, because oranges are symbolic of some of the gifts that St. Nicholas would give. And I was looking at the origin. It seems like it's because of its Spanish origin, but that happens around the 11th century. So we get into the medieval Europe and the introduction to Western Europe. St. Nicholas's relics were moved from Bari, Italy, solidifying his status in Western Christianity. By this time, December 6th was widely observed as St. Nicholas Day, celebrating with gift giving, particularly to children. And then we have the Christianization of winter festivals. It's blended with pre-Christian winter solstice traditions, such as feasting. And this is what I found. So the punishment of children and the indulging, the gluttony of this season. So alcohol, food, whatever it may be that you have a gluttony for. This really comes from a pagan tradition in which this season, so many of the cows would have been slaughtered in, let's say, ancient times. And so within pagan traditions, they would feast on meat, on food, on everything that they had widely available because of the coming of winter, and much of what they had was already slaughtered. So in Northern Europe, St. Nicholas was depicted as a bearded bishop-like figure distributing gifts to children. And then we have with Martin Luther, the Reformation. He no longer wants to venerate saints. And because of Martin Luther's refusal to venerate St. Nicholas, he wanted to move the gift giving from December 6th to the day of Christ's birth, December 25th. And this is really where Western Christianity gets this idea that we wake up on Christmas morning and we give gifts to all the children. We give gifts to each other. We wake up early. This has to do with Martin Luther and Protestantism moving the emphasis from December 6th to December 25th. Not that December 25th wasn't already celebrated as the birth of Christ. As I said, that was. I found in 386, St. John Chrysostom himself described that December 25th was celebrated by Christians as the birth of Jesus Christ. And he argued it was already a long time tradition. That's by 386. So we can imagine within the first century, people already associated December 25th, which, okay, if you're asking the differences between the Julian and the Gregorian, it's still technically December 25th, even though in our Gregorian calendars, it's in January. So just FYI. So with Protestant Reformation, particularly in Northern Europe, they sought to minimize the veneration of saints, including St. Nicholas. In Germany, Martin Luther promoted the Christkind, Christ child, as the bringer of gifts, shifting focus to Christmas Eve rather than St. Nicholas Day. And then you have Santa Claus in the Netherlands. The Catholic regions of St. Nicholas remain popular. The Dutch Santa Claus, a bishop-like figure who delivered gifts on December 5th, the eve of his feast day, preserved much of the saint's original identity. And as I said, the Dutch brought all this stuff to New Amsterdam in America. And then 19th century, we have the literary developments. Washington Irving's Knickerbocker's History of New York. Irving satirically described St. Nicholas as a Dolly Dutchman who flew over rooftops in a wagon delivering gifts. This portrayal began merging Santa Claus with American folklore. And then here we have a visit from St. Nicholas. So I want to read to you guys the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, which was then renamed 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Because I'm sure many of you guys, if you have children, you're probably going to read this tonight. At least I know that's what my parents did when I was a kid. We always would read 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Christ CB throws in $9.99, $10, says, "Glory be to Jesus Christ our Lord." Thank you so much, Christ CB, for that support. Do appreciate that, my man. God bless you. And if you guys want to show any appreciation or have any questions or comments, feel free to send those in on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. So here is the poem that Clement Clark Moore put together. "'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out of the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash to open the shutters and throw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below. when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer, now Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder, on Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all, as leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed in all fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. And he had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and they all flew like the dawn of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. So that is Clement Clark Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is now known as 'Twas a Night Before Christmas. And so then we get Thomas Nast taking this poem and building upon it with pictorial depictions. And so he depicted Santa as a plumpy, bearded man in a red suit trimmed with fur. He established Santa's residence at the North Pole with his naughty and nice list. And then we get Coca-Cola with Haddon Sunbloom for 33 years. I saw somebody that didn't go unnoticed by somebody in the chat. I thought the same thing. So Coca-Cola paid Haddon for 33 years. Interesting choice number. Now, could it be the age of Christ, or could it be some Masonic symbolism there? Not sure. Not sure. I'll let you guys come to your own conclusion. But Coca-Cola commissioned Haddon Sunbloom to create advertisements featuring Santa Claus. Sunbloom's Santa became the definitive version, a warm, grandfatherly-like figure in a red suit with white trim and a black belt and boots. Coca-Cola's global reach spread this image internationally, standardizing Santa Claus's now contemporary appearance. And so I want to play for you guys real quick the video that I had of one of the professors that wanted to describe this. So let me pull that up real quick. This gentleman right here. So this is discussing again how and why Coca-Cola influenced the creation of Santa Claus.
So a little bit over or around, I should say, 125 years ago, Coca-Cola was doing the math on its sales. I believe by that point it had already abandoned the cocaine content. It was just cola at that point. But once you name something cocaine cola, how do you ever walk back from that? You know what I mean? It's too good of a name. So they noticed something. People bought Coca-Cola in the summer, a little bit in the fall, a little bit in spring, not in the winter. People didn't think of it as a winter drink. So the Coca-Cola advertisers were like, well, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow trick people or convince people or talk people or coax or whatever, brainwash people into drinking Coca-Cola in the winter too. So here's what Coca-Cola advertisers came up with. They thought, what if we somehow worked Coca-Cola into Christmas. Now, I know what you're thinking. Christmas is such a big deal. Not back then. Back then, Easter was the big deal. Christmas was important. People would go do mass to commemorate Christ's birth, but everybody's bored. The real interesting thing is to be killed, executed, and then come back 2 days later. That's fascinating, which is why people had focused on Easter.
And we can still see this focus in at least the Orthodox tradition. The reason why Pascha is the epitome celebration in Orthodoxy is because it has to do with the resurrection. And this is true that Christmas didn't take the importance within the liturgical calendar that it sees specifically in Western Christian. If you ask a Protestant, what's the most important day in the liturgical year, I would imagine many of them would say Christmas. If you ask an Orthodox, they're going to say Pascha. I don't know what you ask the average Catholic. I have no idea what they might say. Now, for kids, obviously, Christmas is mystical. The lights, going and seeing places. It's a wonderful, spectacular event. But within liturgical importance, Christmas wasn't as celebrated as Pascha. So he is making a true point here in regards to some of the subtle distinctions. And I think when we look at Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity, in Eastern Christianity, it still holds the Pascha as the ultimate celebration. And Christmas is important. Absolutely. We just, our men's group at church, we just did a whole overview of why the incarnation is so important and how it relates to all the different aspects of our Orthodox faith. But it wasn't as important as Pascha.
So what the Coca-Cola advertisers did was they found a saint who was about to be decanonized, Santa Claus. The Catholic Church was like, he hasn't performed a miracle in a while, let's unemploy him. They grabbed him, they merged him with the story of Saint Nick, and then somebody got inspired. And the inspiration was to merge him with Kris Kringle. Kris Kringle was a Danish thief whose job in the day was a chimney sweep. He could pop his shoulders out and he could fit down a chimney. He would rob your house and then work his way back up, but you'd have a clean chimney. And they merged this together, but they then took St. Nicholas out. He was usually portrayed as a skinny young man in green and brown clothing. They stuck him in Coca-Cola colors, red and white. They even decided to give him some pink in his skin to keep the Coca-Cola colors going. So they made him an old man so he could have white hair. And then they stuck him on the bottle. That's why periodically you'll see Santa Claus on a Coca-Cola bottle or a Coca-Cola can around Christmas time, because they made him up and they transformed Christmas. So instead of Christmas being an important event, but not an especially emotional event, an especially involved event necessarily, I mean, there were nice traditions around it, stockings and maybe a Christmas tree. They turned it into this thing where all of a sudden this mythical being who drinks a lot of Coca-Cola is bringing you presents. I guess that's how he stays up so late, because think about how many hours it would take to bring presents to everybody. And in the process now, the average Christian in the United States at least thinks Christmas is the important Christian holiday. And it's forced other religions to think about what holiday they could promote during that time period, like Hanukkah. Hanukkah was never especially important. I mean, it's important, but not like, you wouldn't evolve like a whole bunch of time and energy and effort around it. But then, right, if you're Jewish and you're like looking at your kids going, we wish we had a Christmas tree, you need something to compete with this.
So I don't know who this guy is. I was trying to look at this YouTube channel. It only has 70 subscribers, and he certainly doesn't seem like a Christian to me. It seems like he's kind of trying to uncover esoteric ideas. He's kind of a truther to some degree, but I have no idea. I just thought it was an interesting video because it does highlight how Christmas, at least within Western Christianity, I would say specifically Protestantism, Jesse said Pascha is the most important celebration of Catholics. I would agree, but I asked him, do you think if you ask the average Catholic, what's the most important Christian holiday of the year, would they say Pascha, or I guess for them Easter, or would they say Christmas? Probably Christmas. Somebody says that professor was lying about the Egyptian gospel fight. Oh, okay. Well, I have no idea who this guy is. He's as sophisticated as Billy Carson. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah, probably. I'm not. He clearly kind of misunderstands some of the Christian theological elements, but he was making a good point in regards to how the 1931 ad campaign by Coca-Cola was so incredibly important. Oh, he says he was also glazing Islam. Oh gosh. Good Lord. As you can see, I was the only video I clicked on his. So I don't know if his YouTube channel is not very popular, but I was just showing that particular video. Anyways, let's get back to our document here in regards to covering this ultimate overview. And we can see that that's the 1931 Coca-Cola campaign up to 1964. And then the mid-20th century, Santa goes global. Santa was adopted into various cultures, often blending with local traditions. Like I said, Father Christmas of England, Pierre Noel of France, which is really just Father Christmas in the French version, and Dead Moroz, which I have a video on, Father Frost in Russia. We're going to watch that. And so some of the cultural and commercial consolidation, Santa Claus became a universal figure of Christmas, celebrated in both religious and secular context. And his character, while rooted in Christian traditions of St. Nicholas, now embodies themes of generosity, joy, and the spirit of giving, transcending religious boundaries. At least that's how they portray it, transcending. I need to put my air quotes in there. And so contemporary Santa Claus, Thomas Nast, he expanded Santa's lore over the next 3 decades. Nast redefined Santa's image, developing many of the elements that are now canonical. Santa's residence in the North Pole, the concept of Santa maintaining a naughty or nice list, which we saw came out of some of the Nordic and Germanic traditions regarding Odin, and a workshop filled with elves where toys were crafted. And Nast illustrations depicted Santa as a larger figure with more human, grandfatherly appearance over time. And by the late 19th century, Nast's work had largely standardized the image of Santa Claus in the United States, laying the groundwork for later interpretations. And so Sunbloom during the 20th century, as we said, they needed to boost sales. They couldn't sell Coca-Cola in the wintertime, so they needed to come up with an ad campaign, and they used Santa Claus to do so. And so he had a prominent commercial artist. He was hired to create Santa Claus imagery for the Christmas advertising campaigns. Sunbloom's Santa was a significant departure from Nast's version, leaning heavily into warmth, joy, and approachability. He depicted Santa as a plump, jolly figure with a round face and rosy cheeks, dressed in a red suit trimmed with white fur, completed by a black belt and boots. This image became synonymous with Christmas cheer and generosity. Humanizing Santa, Sunbloom's Santa was modeled on real-life inspiration, particularly his friend Lou Prentice, adding a natural and relatable feel to the figure. And later, Sunbloom himself was a model with when creating some of his paintings. Coca-Cola's advertisement campaign. The advertisements were widely distributed in magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post, Life magazine, and National Geographic. Sunbloom's Santa was often shown enjoying a Coca-Cola, further embedding him in the cultural conscious as a symbol of Christmas warmth and happiness. And the consistency of Coca-Cola's advertising over decades helped cement this version of Santa as a definitive global image. And so it's really Sunbloom that we can give the global standardization of Santa Claus, give him credit for. The reinforcement of themes, the advertisement emphasized themes of joy, generosity, family, associating these with qualities with both Santa and the Coca-Cola brand, and of course, his enduring legacy. Here's a little bit of an overview of the differences between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar. I figured some people reading this would maybe wonder, well, why do the Orthodox celebrate in January and we celebrate on December 25th? And so it has to do with the difference between the Julian and Gregorian. So in 46 BC, Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, which became the standard across the Roman Empire. The early church adopted the Julian calendar for liturgical purposes, including the calculation of feasts like Easter and Christmas. We'll put that as Pascha. And the establishment of Christmas on December 25th, as I said, was 9 months after the Annunciation of March 25th. And the Gregorian reform, so Pope Gregory's reforms, by the 16th century, the Julian calendar had drifted approximately 10 days out of alignment with the solar year due to its inaccuracies in its calculations. And so Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar to correct this drift. The reform skipped 10 days to realign the calendar with the equinoxes and implemented rules to better calculate leap years. The Gregorian calendar was quickly adopted in Catholic countries and later in Protestant secular states. The Gregorian calendar became the civil calendar in most of the world. It is now the international standard. And so here's my list of why Christmas is not pagan for anybody who says it is. So first, early Christian calculation of December 25th. Evidence from Christian writings. The earliest recorded association with December 25th with the birth of Christ predates the institution of the Roman pagan festival Sol Invictus. It predates it. Okay, so when you watch these videos by people talking about like Zeitgeist, the movie Zeitgeist, that talk about, oh, it's Mithra and Sol Invictus and Horus worship. No, it's not. You cannot prove factually that any of those celebrations occurred on December 25th. And so Hippolytus of Rome, in his commentary on Daniel, calculated December 25th as the birth date of Christ based on the presumed conception of March 25th. This association reflects the theological reasoning rather than a reaction to pagan practices, like they argue. And with his birth occurring 9 months later. So chronograph of 354, this early Roman document dated to 354 lists December 25th as the celebration of Christ's birth. This predates the widespread observance of pagan festivals like Sol Invictus on that date, which I said was moved to the 25th. So here's the Sol Invictus was likely moved to the 25th in order to compete with Christianity, not because Christianity was building upon pagan traditions. The festival of Sol Invictus was established by Emperor Aurelian in 274, long after Christians had already been observing December 25th as the Nativity of Christ. There's no evidence that Sol Invictus was celebrated on December 25th prior to its official establishment under Aurelian, raising the likelihood that it was placed there to compete with an already existing Christian feast. Aurelian, seeking to unify the Roman Empire under the worship of a single deity, likely chose December 25th for Sol Invictus to rival the growing influence of Christianity rather than the reverse. And so, obviously, the symbolism of the winter solstice, we already talked about, the light of the world. So the symbolism of the light increasing after the winter solstice resonated with Christian theology, emphasizing Jesus as the light of the world. Now, if March 25th was the Annunciation, it makes sense. And it's also, isn't it apropos that the universe itself would be celebrating the birth of God with the winter solstice? While this may superficially appear similar to pagan sun worship, it reflects distinct theological appropriation of natural symbolism independent of specific pagan festivals. And so lack of evidence for Christian adaptation, no contemporary accusations of syncretism. Early Christian writers such as Tertullian were highly critical of pagan practices and often condemned any hint of syncretism. If Christmas had been directly borrowed from pagan festivals, it would likely have provoked significant internal debate or criticism, but no such accusations appear in early Christian sources. Instead, early Christian texts emphasize the incarnation of Christ and the theological significance of the Nativity. Distinctive Christian practices. Christmas celebrations centered on the birth of Christ with liturgies, hymns, and scripture readings focused on the Nativity narrative in the Gospels. These celebrations were markedly different from the revelry of pagan festivals like Saturnalia, which were focused on feasting, role reversals, and general debauchery. And then Saturnalia, this is often another common accusation, is that Christmas was really just built upon Saturnalia pagan festivals, but they were never on December 25th. So the Roman festival of Saturnalia, often cited as a precursor to Christmas, was celebrated from December 17th to the 23rd, not the 25th. And while Saturnalia involved feasting, gift giving, and merriment, it concluded before the 25th and had no direct connection to the Christian observance of the Nativity. Well, here's another one that I've seen people say. Brumalia. Brumalia, another Roman winter festival, ended with the winter solstice around December 21st, again predating December 25th and having no documented influence on the Christian tradition. And then the last one, the spread of December 25th in the Christian tradition, Eastern and Western celebrations. The celebration of Christ's birth on December 25th originated independently in the Western Church and later spread to the East. The Eastern Church initially celebrated Christ's nativity alongside his baptism on January 6th, the Epiphany. But this has to do with a Gregorian calendar shift, showing that December 25th date was not universally adopted to counter pagan festivals, but developed organically within different regions. And a global adoption as Christianity spread, December 25th gained significance due to its theological and liturgical meaning rather than any dependence on pre-existing pagan practices. So the claim that December 25th was chosen for Christmas to supplant pagan festivals like Sol Invictus or Saturnalia is not supported by any historical evidence. Instead, the date was likely established based on theological reasoning, Jewish traditions, and early Christian liturgical calculations. If anything, it appears that certain pagan festivals were moved to December 25th to compete with the growing prominence of Christmas, not the other way around. This reinforces the Christian origins of the date and its celebration as distinctly theological and liturgical observance. So anyways, guys, this whole document, as I said, this ultimate overview of the evolution of Santa Claus from St. Nicholas to Coca-Cola, this is all going to be available at my website right after the stream is ended. So if you'd like to get access to it, just sign up $5 a month and you can get access to it in all my other show notes and videos. So with that being said, now let's go and have a little bit more fun with some of our videos here. So we've already got this one. Here is one on the Christmas tree. And so here is a Encyclopedia Britannica article describing the Christian origins of the Christmas tree, not the other way around. And one of the best videos I could find discussing this was actually a video from Wes Huff, who is a Baptist apologist. You guys know him from the recent fallout with Billy Carson. But this is him addressing the role of the Christmas tree in historic Christianity, and I want to share that with you guys.
Loved ones to sing songs before bowing down to retrieve my presents.
So he's reading a comment by a Protestant Christian accusing the utilization of Christmas trees as a form of pagan worship. A Christmas tree, says, is an idol. You bring it sacrifices, hold hands around it to sing songs, and then you bow down to it to get your presents. I've never seen a clear example of a pagan worship before. Jeremiah 10:3-4 clearly forbids you to have a Christmas tree. You can try your best to say it, don't, but what else could it be talk about? So not the most articulate comment in the world. And so Jeremiah 10:3-4 is referring to the utilization of trees and really the carving of idols out of trees, not placing a Christmas tree in your house, which of course Christ was crucified, sometimes referred to as the tree, right? The tree of life. He is the tree of life, symbolizing again the reversal of the forbidden fruit and eating from the tree of knowledge. Christ is the tree of life, crucified on the cross. So check this out.
In pagan worship. Once again, the sources we do have for the origins of the Christmas tree aren't even remotely pagan. One potential comes from the story of St. Boniface from the 8th century, when he's said to have cut down the sacred oak tree that the locals had dedicated to Thor. When he wasn't killed by lightning, he's said to have pointed to the fir tree and dedicated it to Christ. Some scholars have hypothesized that the tradition arose from the paradise trees in the 1500s. A paradise tree was an evergreen tree decorated with fruit to represent the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, and a play telling the Genesis story would be done around the paradise tree. The plays were typically held on December 24th, and then, as the fruit was taken off,
Frankie D. Frankie D says, nah, bro. I saw a documentary on the History Channel that is clearly a pagan tradition going back to the Anunnaki of Globeki Tepe. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Thank you, Frankie D. And I saw that. I watched all the History Channel videos, and man, History Channel has really taken a nosedive. It is incredibly anti-Christian. So all the videos I watched from the History Channel were trying to promote this pagan narrative of Christmas, that somehow the Christians were adopting pagan traditions and trying to supplant them or incorporate them into their own liturgical calendar. But that's just not the case when you try to find historical documents. That's not the case. Just like with Sol Invictus, they moved that in the 4th century to compete with Christianity. It was never celebrated on the 25th. But when you watch movies like Zeitgeist or the History Channel, I mean, it's the same old thing over and over. So
off the tree remained, and it was then decorated for the next day in celebration for Christmas. These trees set up in people's houses would remind them of the Garden of Eden on Christmas Eve and the restoration of Christ coming into the world, of the garden to come in the new heaven and the new earth. There is also a famous story linked to the Protestant reformer Martin Luther, in which he is said during a winter evening stroll to have been overcome with the brilliance of the stars in the night sky, painting the background over the evergreen forests. In order to capture this moment, it is recorded that Luther cut down and erected a tree in the main hall of their house, covering its branches with lighted candles. Although the tradition was well known from that point on in Germany and dispersed parts of Europe, it was not practiced in Britain until the 19th century. When Queen Victoria married her German cousin Prince Albert, the custom was brought into the household of the British royal family. From then on, it was associated with royalty, and wealthier middle-class families soon followed suit with the tradition during the holiday season. Over here in Canada, where I live, it had been adopted as a tradition just prior to the 1700s, where we have records of Brunswick soldiers stationed in Quebec who are said to have decorated large fir trees with candles and fruit during the holiday season. Now, it's true that ancient pagans across Europe used trees in certain practices and ceremonies. This much is a true fact. However, none of these practices resembles what eventually became the Christmas tree, and none of them can be tied to fir or pine trees specifically. Aside from the fact that
now, somebody who promotes the psychedelic narrative, they would argue, oh, yeah, we can, because the Amanita muscaria, it grows under the coniferous trees, and that this is the whole origin story. But as he said, when you look at the historical timeline, this is a development of practices, and I haven't found anything that directly connects it back with the influence of these shamanic traditions. Now, maybe they're deeply embedded in these traditions, and as Vigo said, as Orthodox, we believe in Logos Spermaticos. So there's only one truth, Logos, the incarnated God. He is the capital T truth. And pieces of that reality can be found in all types of traditions, including pagan traditions, pagan practices. And so just because pagans use something that may look similar to us, again, it's the word concept fallacy, or we should say the symbol concept fallacy. Just because a symbol is similar or the word is the same word doesn't mean that the meaning or the intention behind it or even the historicity of it is identical. This is why you see these truther type conspiracy theorists. They always are falling victim to the word concept fallacy. So if something looks similar, well, now we have this grand narrative of how it originated, which is usually divorced from any historicity.
By the time that Christmas trees became popular and associated with Christmas itself, virtually all of these pagan worship practices in Europe were long dead and forgotten. There is no evidence of a direct link, and if the most we can connect is a parallel correlation, then that's pretty weak. Correlation does not equal causation, and along with trees, pagans also had religious buildings, songs they sang, almsgiving, prayers. Some Egyptian superstitions also included the images of crosses and fish. By the same logic, we better get rid of all those things in modern Christianity as well. The problem we run into is that you can draw all sorts of parallels with things pagans did and do, and practices we see in Christianity. But once again, correlation does not equal causation. And to draw the connection between a pagan root into a modern Christmas practice, we need to be able to draw a clear and definitive straight line. That just simply cannot be done with all the examples we see within modern Christmas practices. This also goes, by the way, for wreaths, mistletoe, and even Santa Claus. You might have a problem with commercialization of all of these things, and I can understand that. But to try and then say that they're pagan is just a jump in logic that seems to, at best, be silly to me. Now, some will grant that and simply say, well, they might not be pagan, but scripture clearly condemns such practices. I mean, look at Jeremiah 10, verses 2-4. This is what the Lord says: do not learn the ways of the nations, or be terrified by signs in the heavens, though the nations are terrified by them. For the practices of the people are worthless. They cut a tree out of a forest, and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with a hammer and nails, so it will not totter. The argument then is that this is God forbidding decorating a Christmas tree. So doing so is a sin which Scripture and God condemns. The problem is that this verse, when placed in the context of what Jeremiah is actually talking about, completely debunks it. What Jeremiah is talking about is a craftsman who is cutting down a tree and carving a graven idol out of the wood. The very next verse mockingly compares what is being done by these pagans with a scarecrow. In other words, just as a scarecrow is a mock representation of a person to scare away birds in a field, but cannot move, talk, or has no life in and of itself, neither does the wooden idol being made by the craftsman. The verse specifically mocks these wooden figures' lack of ability to speak or walk. Why? Because they're being carved with mouths and feet, yet they're still a piece of lifeless wood. This wouldn't make any sense if what is being talked about in context looked like a tree. And that's besides the point that it would make no sense for God to be telling the ancient Israelites to avoid making Christmas trees, which wouldn't be done for thousands of years in the future, and thus have no understandable application for Jeremiah's immediate audience. Many people in the comment section of my social.
So that was the section of him covering Christmas trees, but I thought was pretty good and pretty much puts to rest this idea that the Christmas tree is a direct appropriation from pagan festivals. I understand the Druids. Again, we know what pagan traditions, or again, St. Boniface cutting down the tree that was dedicated to Thor, that Christianity has an entire tradition of rejecting, again, the idolization of nature spirits and stuff like that. But the utilization of the Christmas tree is not specifically pagan. There's just no historical evidence for it. Now, the next one I want to show you guys is, this is Father Peter, again, warning people about teaching your children about the sort of secular Santa and divorcing it from the importance of St. Nicholas.
Videos, and there's actually a lot of videos like this. How did St. Nicholas rather become Santa Claus? You can find multiple videos talking about the history, which is important for all of us to understand just how great a distortion and the perversion is Santa Claus, and how clearly that's satanic. I think you can say undoubtedly it's satanic when it distorts, perverts, and takes our attention away from the saints. And we now are focused on a fat old man, not an ascetic, not a person of prayer, not one who gives, but one who, now, I mean, Santa Claus gives, but it's all material, and it's all usually about the child getting, right? Now we have the focus is on getting gifts, because much of this was born over the last 200 years in America, and the use of this image of Santa Claus was for commercial purposes, to make money and to make the whole Christmas season become one of materialism, so that the Coca-Colas of the world and all the rest make lots of money. Obviously, this is far, far from Christ, far from the saints, far from St. Nicholas, a distortion of the feast, and the enemy of our spiritual lives, right? I can't stress how bad the Santa Claus myth has become for most people and children. And so I, as a spiritual father, I would recommend, and some people are going to call me, you know, a party pooper, as they would say, right? But I would recommend you not teach your children about Santa Claus. You not have young little impressionable people believe Santa Claus. You not tell people lies, little children lies. Here he's coming from the North Pole, this fat old man and reindeer and all the rest. Because you are distracting them from the feast. You are undermining their piety in the feast. You are creating dedications and expectations and hopes in total delusion and mythology, which doesn't exist. You're purporting, you're presenting images of not virtuous men, but greedy, fat old men and a lot of pagan imagery. So why would a Christian not present St. Nicholas, but then turn up and talk about the distortion of St. Nicholas? So I think that's a no-brainer. I don't think I need to make the case or like patristic commentary on this. It should be fairly obvious to everybody. And again, it's so much better for your children to get started on the foundation of the saints and the actual feast than to be totally and utterly distracted and then become obsessed. Already it's hard enough without all that. Even just the expectation of gifts for young children is already a distraction from the feast, right? And I think most of us are giving gifts, and it's not a bad thing to give gifts on St. Nicholas Day or Christmas, but it's hard for little children not to want that and to be focused on that than to be focused on the feast. And so do as much as you can not to undermine that and to make it as minor a temptation as possible. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. Now, if you want to dive deeper, there's this stuff online. Again, there's this video I found just yesterday, the role of Coca-Cola in distorting and using Santa Claus to make billions. It's my title, but you can find that on Rumble. It's pretty damning, just how Coca-Cola and other corporations in their wake totally, utterly distorted St. Nicholas, intentionally created this whole myth to sell their product in the middle of the winter to people and to create another reason for people to spend their money.
Let's see if we can find that Rumble video real quick. I got some other videos to show you guys, but I did not put that in. Okay, .com / what is it? Embed.
Middle of the winter to people and to create another.
Embed. See if we can find this. Embed / what is that? Oh.
St. Nicholas intentionally created this whole myth to sell like patristic commentary.
Let's see. V5Y 393Q / see if anything comes up.
125.
Oh, it's the video that I showed you guys. Okay, it's of the goofy professor. Okay. All right, we're on the same page. So let's check out these other videos. The first one I want to play is of Dead Moreau. So this is a figure that a lot of people in the West we've never heard of. And this is Father Froth. This is sort of the Slavic Santa Claus, if you will. So let's check this video out. It's pretty good.
The icy grandfather, Ded Moroz, is a mythical figure connected to winter in Slavic folklore, and a key figure in Russian and some other Slavic countries' New Year and Christmas festivities. Ded Moroz is a tall, old man with a long white beard, wearing a fur-lined long coat, a tall fur hat, and a walking stick. He is often joined by his granddaughter and helper, Snegorochka, the Snow Maiden. She is a pretty young girl, dressed in a winter outfit, helping Ded Moroz to bring gifts and spread joy to the children during the winter vacations. Her presence lends a touch of charm to the holiday celebrations. Russian tradition says that Ded Moroz resides in the far north, in a land of perpetual winter. On New Year's Eve or Christmas, He travels in a sleigh pulled by 3 white horses to hand out presents to children.
So we can see the white horses. Remember Santa Claus of the Dutch tradition, that he always rode a white horse as well. So this is before the reindeer mythology got incorporated.
Kids are urged to behave nicely and be kind all year round, so that Dead Moroz can bring them presents as a reward. Families usually invite someone to dress up as Dead Moroz and visit their homes to give presents and share the joy of the holiday. Dead Moroz is a much-loved figure in Russian and Slavic culture, epitomizing the wintry spirit and providing happiness and joy to children and families during the festive season. He exemplifies how distinct cultures can have similar figures, but with their own unique stories and characteristics. Whilst the West celebrates Santa Claus at Christmas, many in Eastern Europe look forward to the arrival of Dead Moroz and Snegorochka at New Year, uniting in celebration, hope, and joy.
So that's a little bit about Dead Moroz. And then this is a great little history overview from Santa Claus tradition within the Dutch, within the Netherlands, within the Dutch civilization, up to its present day. This is by Ryan Reeves. He's a Protestant biblical historian, so not exactly orthodox, but this is a good little overview. So check out this next 10 minutes.
I think is important. For the Dutch, Nicholas is known as Sinterklaas, which is, of course, the origin of the phrase Santa Claus as you and I know it. He has several of the features that would later become Santa, but it's not quite as clear as you think it is. You see.
Oh, I got to give a special thank you to Vigo. He throws in a generous $30 super chat over on Streamlabs. Thank you so much, Vigo. He says, Merry Christmas. God bless you, DPH, for the wealth of edifying insight you have relayed to us and your wonderful audience. Many years to you and yours. Glory to God. Well, thank you so much, Vigo. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that generous support. Guys, smash that like. And if you have any questions or comments, or you'd like to support my work and channel, please send a super chat using Streamlabs Dono Chat or YouTube. And if you're feeling generous this Christmas Eve, please give some COTEL Crew memberships to the chat. Everybody loves that. It's a great way to give back.
See, in the Netherlands, during the time of the Renaissance and a little bit after, it was said that Santa Claus lived in Spain throughout the year preparing gifts. Now, Spain at the time owned the Netherlands, and so the connection there was very obvious to them. He was back at the homeland making gifts, and he came once a year, again on December 6th, to check if the children had been good. And Santa Claus had an adopted orphan boy named Peter, who was a Moor from that time in Spanish history, before the Reconquista removed the Moor's presence as much as possible from Spain. Santa Claus rode on a carriage drawn by horses, and he would, depending on the story, deposit gifts in wooden shoes in the windows, or young Pete himself would shimmy down the chimney to deliver the presents to the kids. Now, this Dutch tradition, as you can tell, is the origins of a lot of what will become Santa Claus. But it's the same old tradition, only changed and altered just a bit. However, there are two things that we need to point out. In the original Dutch practice, Santa Claus remained a bishop, and he was there to see if the kids were naughty or nice. He is not a magical creature. He is still very much a part of the clergy. But also, to this day, the practice of dressing up as Black Pete is deeply problematic. Another story told by the Dutch is that Black Peter, or Black Pete as he's called, merely has soot on his face from climbing up and down the chimneys. That's not true, though. Historically, he was Moorish. He was of African descent. This story actually originally was more like Robin Hood, and if you're my age, you'll remember the best version of Robin Hood, which is the Kevin Costner version, where a man from the Crusades has connected with a companion that is Moorish, and they travel together as allies. That was the original Santa Claus. Again, from the Renaissance, it was this idea that a wealthy person living in Spain with an orphan boy at his side would come and bestow benevolence upon the kids there in the Netherlands. Now, today, needless to say, there's a lot of controversy about it. So if you arrive at the 1800s, there really is no Santa Claus. The Dutch practice is, again, still largely Catholic, still focused on a man from Spain coming to weigh the good and the bad from kids. So where does Santa Claus come from? Well, the simple answer is he's invented in New York. St. Nick and Christmas presents and all of the lore, you might say, behind Santa Claus was invented almost entirely by a few men in New York in the 1800s. And I use the word invent purposefully, because while there are roots and hints of Santa Claus in Europe, as we've already seen, especially in the Netherlands, what happened in New York was, you might say, creating a folk history for the first time. The men involved were largely associated with the New York Historical Society, And if you remember your civics classes, New York was originally New Amsterdam. That's right. There was a long memory there, you see, of certain older traditions from the old world that the wealthy elites in New York felt were ripe for developing a new tradition in America. The society had Dutch roots, and they began to hold annual dinners on December 6th, there's that date again, to recall the original story of Santa Claus, now called Saint Nick, minus the kid in blackface. And then, after some rumination on the themes of Christmas and Saint Nick, two men in particular, though there are a few others, should be credited for starting the ball rolling on modern Christmas: Washington Irving and Clement Clark Moore. Irving, of course, is famous for the stories of Rip Van Winkle and the legend of Sleepy Hollow. But he was a famous writer in his day, and he loved, we should add, to make up things in his histories that were entirely fictional. He seems to like to blend fact and fiction with abandon. Irving created a lot of legendary ideas that we still associate with New York to this day. For example, he came up with the name Knickerbockers to describe the New Yorkers, and he was the first to call New York Gotham. Well, in his history of New York, Irving referenced Saint Nick or Santa over 24 times. In Irving's work, he is still a bishop, and for most of the men in society, they kept that traditional Dutch theme. Only for Irving, Saint Nick was no longer the punisher. He was a jolly old man who loved to spread joy through gifts, and he was also now living in the North Pole. Can't have him coming back and forth from Spain. It was a lot more magical, you might say. But the real explosion of popularity about Santa came shortly thereafter from Clement Moore in his poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Now, I will say here that there is some debate if Clement wrote the poem or if a man named Henry Livingston did. I won't go into that here, but there is a book that I've linked in the description of this video if you want to read more about it on Kindle. I'll keep referring to the author of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" as Clement for convenience, though. But Clement was an independently wealthy man, also a part of this elite society, who taught Greek and other languages at General Theological Seminary. And he wrote this poem in the same tradition as Washington Irving and these other men who were discussing this folk story of St. Nick. The inspiration for his poem, it seems, was just simply his imagination. Clement, though, takes the tradition in an entirely new direction, and from this point on, Santa is becoming a real tradition in America. For one, St. Nick is no longer a clergy member. In fact, for Clement, he's not even human. He's a fat elf. Most people don't realize that when they read the poem. He's described as a jolly old elf. He rides on a sleigh drawn by tiny reindeer who each have names. That is also an invention of Clement. There is no Rudolph yet. Rudolph is invented later in the 20th century by a father whose wife was dying of cancer, but the others are there. And no, these reindeer are not Norse in origin. In fact, until this poem, there is zero affiliation with Santa and reindeer in European history. So here in the early 1800s in America, we have the full origination of Santa Claus, based, to be sure, on older traditions, but frankly, a new folk story created in the city of New York. Now, back overseas in Europe, in England, the story has developed during this century as well. This was the Victorian era, and Queen Victoria was the queen of doing things properly, and with a bit more, we might say, pomp and circumstance. Famously, the image of the royal family with a Christmas tree was famous, and suddenly Christmas trees became fashionable in England. And that picture caught the eye of Sarah Josepha Hale, who I mentioned in my video on Thanksgiving. And in the 1850s, she published that picture in the Goody's Lady Book, and then added to that over the years all sorts of new traditions for decorating the home for Christmas. Now, it's the 1850s. We've not yet approached the wonders of exterior illumination, but it's coming. But lo and behold, because of Queen Victoria's picture and the Goody's Lady Book, the Christmas tree in the 1850s became part of the American tradition. Likewise, the stories of Santa Claus and his reindeer found their way back over to England and eventually supplanted Father Christmas there as part of now a quintessentially British Christmas. So you have kind of a cross-fertilization. Ideas are moving to America for Christmas, and America sent Santa back to the motherland. So to put it very simplistically, England creates the deeper themes of the Christmas spirit, of generosity, merriment, and the overall, you might say, aesthetic of Christmas that many Americans found appealing. And all of that without Santa. Just see Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol as a great example of this. Published only a decade or two after the New Yorkers started fiddling around with this idea of Santa Claus. Dickens' Christmas Carol is a story of a man, Scrooge, who has lost his sense of Christmas spirit and generosity. Visited by the spirit of Marley, who, by the way, vaguely is in the chains of purgatory or hell for his greed, though it's all given a very secular ring to it. And after Scrooge's visitation by the three ghosts of Christmas, he finally is brimming again with the joy of English generosity and the Christmas spirit. Notice, by the way, no Santa anywhere in sight. In America, though, the lore and the heritage of who Santa was began to grow. And over the rest of the 1800s, that tradition will go back to England and will become a part of British Christmas ever since. And finally, if you noticed, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," as I said, describes Santa as an elf. And what happens over the 1800s is that Santa really has no set figure or look, you might say. He has no brand. He is tall sometimes, he is short, he's an elf, he's a human, he wears red, he wears green. It's kind of a cacophony of different ideas. But finally, in the 1930s, the iconic representation of Santa as we know it would not exist were it not for Coke and the work of Haddon Sundblom. By the way, if you want to see a legendary career in graphic design and art, just go Google Sundblom. He literally did everything for the course of his career. He put the Quaker Oats Man on the box. He created Aunt Jemima. He created all kinds of legendary brands. But he also gave Santa his final bona fide image. Sundblom gets rid of the fat elf imagery and instead makes him the jolly fat man with a white beard that we know and love. Rosy cheeks, twinkling eyes, sneaking in to eat a cookie, and leaving gifts under the tree, that newly invented Christmas tree that was now a regular part of the American home. This was all invented in the 1930s. In other words, Santa, as you and I know it, is not even 100 years old. But after Sundblom, there's no going back. This is Santa, at least in the minds of most people who celebrate Christmas.
So I thought that was a good little overview. And I do have something to describe the origins of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This is an article from the History Channel, which kind of had some poor sources in regards to the paganization of Christmas. Their general argument, at least what I found, was that it's a Christian adoption of pagan festivals, which we've already disproven. But here's a little something on the ninth reindeer, Rudolph. How did Rudolph come into existence? And this reads, Rudolph, the most famous reindeer of all, was born over 100 years after his 8 flying counterparts. The Red-Nosed Wonder was the creation of Robert L. May, a copywriter of the Montgomery Ward department store. In 1939, that's how recent, 1939, he wrote a Christmas-themed story poem to help bring holiday traffic into a store. Using a similar rhyme pattern as Moore's "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," May told the story of Rudolph, a young reindeer who was teased by the other deer because of his large glowing red nose. But when Christmas Eve turned foggy and Santa worried that he wouldn't be able to deliver gifts that night, the former outcast saved Christmas by leading the sleigh by the light of his red nose. Rudolph's message that given that popularity, a liability can be turned into an asset, proved popular. Montgomery Ward sold almost 2.5 million copies of the story in 1939. When it was reissued in 1946, the book sold over 3.5 million copies. Several years later, one of May's friends, Johnny Marks, wrote a short song based on Rudolph's story in 1949. It was recorded by Gene Autry and sold over 2 million copies. Since then, the story has been translated into 25 languages, has been made into a television movie narrated by Burl Ives, which has charmed audiences ever since 1964. So that is the origins of Rudolph. Now, the last video that I have to show you guys is the psychedelic argument that all this stuff has to do with the Amanita muscaria mushroom. But as we can see, Rudolph was literally a creation of somebody in the 20th century. So they're going to make the argument the reason why Rudolph's nose is red is because reindeers eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Well, that's not the case. The reason why Santa Claus is red and white is because of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Well, we have depictions of Santa Claus in green. What are you talking about? And as we know, the contemporary image of Santa Claus is incredibly impacted by Haddon Sundblom's depiction and its association with with Coca-Cola. So I just want to show you this last theory because I got somebody on my old YouTube channel, Visual Vortex, who's already chiming in and saying Santa originated from mushroom symbolism. So just to give these people credence so they can hear their own argument put forth, we can kind of deconstruct and debunk this very popular, Joe Rogan has been promoting this over the last, decade or so, taking the Terrence McKenna idea that this is all related to Amanita muscaria mushroom use, that it's the central symbolism of Western civilization has to do with psychedelic shamanism. So here you go.
And it's full of strange traditions. Activities like hanging stockings and singing songs about flying reindeer have become so deeply ingrained in Christmas that we don't even wonder where they came from. When we trace the origin of Christmas traditions, we find that many of them can be linked to the rituals surrounding the psychedelic mushroom Amanita muscaria. The large red-white spotted Amanita muscaria is the most recognizable mushroom on Earth. Throughout history and across many cultures, people valued this mysterious mushroom for its powerful hallucinogenic properties. For over a millennia, the indigenous people of the Arctic collected Amanita muscaria. These people were called shaman. The word shaman is derived from the Tungus-speaking people of Siberia and connotes a religious specialist. Each year, the shaman would pick the Amanita, dry them, load them into a big sack, and then on December 21st, during the winter solstice, the shaman would go from house to house delivering their gifts.
So again, we see it's not on the 25th. And the idea that they're living in houses with smoking chimneys, they lived in igloos.
These shaman were older bearded men who wore the symbolic colors of red and white to honor the mushroom.
Now, clearly we can see on the left, this top left, this is a guy wearing a fake beard and hair, clearly. The one with the woman dressed in red and white polka dots with white polka dots, this is kind of the standard image that a lot of these arguments make, that it's all ritualized shamanism, is, well, look at the way she's dressed. This is because she's a mushroom shamaness and that she's getting ready to lead people on a vision voyage. And then this bottom left one is also very popular, of a Santa Claus figure holding 2 Amanita muscaria mushrooms with a bite taken out of it.
During the winter solstice, the entryways to people's homes were buried under several feet of snow, so it was easier for the shaman to drop the mushrooms down the smoke hole. This is where the idea of presents down the chimney comes from. The colors of Christmas are red, white.
Now, they say affirmatively this is where it comes from, but as we've already looked at through the timeline of the evolution of Santa Claus, we could see that this got going in the medieval period with figures like Santa Claus and Father Christmas and some of these figures that would come down the chimney. Black Pete, as we saw with Santa Claus, he was the one that was going down the chimney.
White and green. These colors symbolize the red and white Amanita muscaria under an evergreen tree. Amanita muscaria is found throughout the northern hemisphere under conifers and birch trees, just like red and white presents under the Christmas tree. Although deaths are extremely rare, Amanita muscaria is poisonous. In order to reduce the toxicity, shaman would hang the mushrooms on tree branches for them to dry, just like the colorful ornaments on a Christmas tree.
However, if this, again, I would think this argument would make it be a stronger argument if we had a continuous tradition pre-Christianity with these Christmas trees and, let's say, Germanic culture, where you decorate these Christmas trees and stuff, but we don't. As we've already documented, there are specific points in which the Christmas tree gets brought into the celebration of Christmas. So this is not tied to the historical practice of Christmas.
Does flying reindeer have a similar connection to the Amanita muscaria mushrooms? Reindeer are common across Europe and Siberia, and just like the human inhabitants of these areas, they too consumed mushrooms. Siberians who ate the mushrooms may have hallucinated that the grazing reindeer were actually flying. Siberians would also drink the urine of the reindeer because the urine contained the hallucinogenic compounds without the harmful toxins. To add to things,
however, as we've already covered, Santa Claus, historically, as Dead Moroz, they were led by white horses. Santa Claus rode a white horse with Black Pete behind him, and Dead Moroz was led in a sleigh by 3 white horses. We don't get the development of reindeer explicitly until Moore's 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, a visit from St. Nicholas. There we have the naming of 8 reindeer for the first time and associating reindeer with Santa Claus itself.
Rudolph led the other flying reindeer with his glowing red nose, which might have been a representation of the Amanita muscaria leading the psychedelic journey. And it's possible that the idea of helper elves assisting Santa might go back to the spirits encountered by the shaman during a mushroom trip. In fact, the entire image of Santa Claus himself closely resembles that of a mushroom.
See where there's no role in any of this for Saint Nicholas and actually the gift of giving. So the gift of giving is just inebriated mushrooms. This is the whole practice isn't divorced. It's not tied with the history of Saint Nicholas. It's because shamans gave mushrooms during the winter solstice, which they also did at other points of the year. So this wasn't unique to one specific holiday in the year. This is total ridiculousness.
Well, there.
Not that some of the symbolism isn't compelling to some degree, but as we've already covered in this historicity of Santa Claus, this evolution and the Christian practice of Christmas, this is not a direct foundation or catalyst for the celebration at all.
There are many theories about the true origin of Christmas traditions. This excerpt from James Arthur's book, Mushrooms and Mankind, probably best summarizes the Santa magic mushroom theory. Why do people bring pine trees into their houses at the winter solstice, placing brightly colored red?
See, they bring pine trees into their houses at the winter solstice because the relationship to Amanita muscaria. Well, we've already discussed the history of trees being brought into houses, and this is a latter tradition that gets brought into the medieval period, into the Renaissance, and then really gets going during the Victorian age in England. So you're telling me that the British elite or the royal families that we were talking about that really kind of promoted this idea of bringing Christmas trees and decorating them for Christmas, or Martin Luther, right? We already looked at Martin Luther was awestruck by the stars and looking at some of the winter trees covered in snow that he brought some into his house. He did this because of the Amanita muscaria mushroom relationship? No. What are you talking about?
Red and white packages under their boughs as gifts to show their love for each other and as representations of the love of God and the gift of his son's life. It is because under the pine bough is the exact location where one would find this most sacred substance, the Amanita muscaria, in the wild.
Pretty weak. I remember how compelling this was when I was into the psychedelic stuff. You have a psychedelic explanation for everything, right? The stoned ape theory of evolution, that we developed our neofrontal cortex by taking psilocybin mushrooms out in the grasslands of Africa. All this stuff, the psychedelic community, they have a reason for why psychedelics are behind everything. And when you look at this was probably the strongest presentation of this argument. When you look at it, okay, yeah, there's some correlations, there's some interesting symbolism. Let's say the red and white, the shaman, and the mushrooms in the trees, and the flying reindeer. But when you look at the timeline of the historical development of Christmas celebration and Santa Claus, this stuff isn't related at all. Now, you could make an argument that people are taking some of this shamanic practices and incorporating into contemporary Christmas practice. Okay. But to argue that Christmas is built upon this shamanic ritual, there's no evidence whatsoever. So just wanted to throw that out there. Here's an article, again, covering some of the art that Coca-Cola did, so you can see the development of Santa Claus here. But I think we pretty much covered, so Krampus, I was talking about how Krampus, he is literally depicted as like a demon. I mean, look at this stuff. And that the new Christmas movie with The Rock and Chris Evans, the red one, there's one, I watched it with my wife. There's only one explicit reference to Christianity, and that is Santa claiming that he is Saint Nicholas from Myra, and he's a bishop. He does say that at one point, but then Krampus is depicted as his brother who wants to punish everybody on the naughty list, where Santa wants to bless everybody that's on the nice list. And that's kind of the general gist of that movie. But I was just bringing that up because it shows how films now are trying to incorporate Krampus and some of these myths regarding Santa Claus into more popular culture. So Pierre Noël, we mentioned him. This is kind of the Father Christmas of the French world. So it's basically the exact same thing. He's a personification of the Christmas season and spirit. And then Clark Moore, Yule, the Yule celebration. We already mentioned this. This was the festival historically observed by Germanic peoples. Again, they argue it's incorporated into Christmas. Maybe there's a similarity there, but again, as we've already discussed today throughout our stream, it is not, Christmas is not built upon pagan rituals whatsoever. And so here's more of Haddon Sundblom's Coca-Cola depictions of Santa Claus and how it became so prominent. And I mean, these are iconic. I remember seeing many of these when I was a kid, and they're still used today. People collect this stuff. And so here's St. Boniface in regards to him cutting down the pagan tree. And then the conifer, stuff like that. So anyways, guys, that's going to pretty much do the stream today. So apparently Valerie Price is upset because I debunked the Amanita muscaria mushroom. That means I'm promoting the mushrooms. Not sure what that idea is. So Valerie, God bless you. Merry Christmas to you and yours. But the way we do things here is we address the ideas that people have. And I came from the psychedelic community. I'm sure many people in the chat did. And a lot of people believe that Amanita muscaria mushrooms and shamanism, Siberian shamanism, is the origins of the Christmas celebration. And debunking that and providing a steelman for their argument in their own words, and then showing how that is not consistent with our history, is not promoting it in any way. So anyways, I appreciate your thoughts, but we're not promoting it. My whole channel is about debunking and moving people away from these ideas. And because they're so popular and people like Joe Rogan are promoting them, I thought it was necessary to lay out this historical timeline of Santa Claus's evolution, demonstrate the, in fact, Christian foundations of Christmas, highlight how things like Sol Invictus actually got moved in the 4th century from early December, sometimes October, and even we have writings about it being celebrated in August, to December 25th to compete with Christianity because so many people were converting to the faith. And we even have a record of Julian the Apostate, the pagan emperor, lamenting the fact that all the Roman temples were dying due to all these Christians. And that Sol Invictus was the celebration of that at December 25th was a way to try to rejuvenate the Roman temples. We've also demonstrated how Santa Claus is essentially an amalgamation of Sinterklaas of the Dutch Netherlands tradition with Father Christmas of the British tradition, Pierre Noël, French, Father Christmas being the personification of the Christmas spirit, the Christmas season. And this eventually gets turned in and mythologized during the 19th century, specifically in America, where we see Clement Clark Moore's A Visit by St. Nicholas, "'Twas a Night Before Christmas," where we start to see some mythology building around who this Santa Claus figure is. And again, Santa Claus is just the name that Sinterklaas from the Dutch got when they came to New Amsterdam, New York, in America. So Americans, we call it Santa Claus. It was Sinterklaas in the Dutch. This gets then promoted even further with Thomas Nast and his depictions in Harper Weeklies. Again, the first one being the propaganda for the Union soldiers coming to Santa Claus, and he's giving out items and telling them stories and all this different stuff. And then in the 1930s, 1931, Haddon Sundblom, he gets hired by Coca-Cola to develop what we consider now the contemporary Santa Claus. And by the 1940s, we get then the legend of Rudolph and all this different stuff. So this whole Christmas season is really, I mean, at its core, it really gets going in the 20th century. And I think most people just don't realize how new this stuff is. So anyways, that's going to do it for me. Let me just check if there's any more super chats. Merry Christmas to all you guys. First Person Q says, great stream, DPH. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. First Person Q. Merry Christmas, Jay Hamza, Grant's Modern Life, Jesse, Vigo, Screwed Up Texas, Merry Christmas to you guys. Austin DeTulio, Merry Christmas. Urshman, Lim, Gabriella Nicola, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Dr. Crispy Synapse. God bless you, brother. And Moldy Apple, Merry Christmas to you, Moldy Apple. Dano, Valerie Price, everybody in the chat, Merry Christmas to you guys. Wish you guys the absolute best. Oh, First Person Q just gifted a COTEL Crew membership. Thank you so much, First Person Q. Do appreciate that, my man. And let me just double check, see if anybody sent any questions or comments in. Let's see. Looks like over on Dono Chat, shout out to Jay Hamza. Jay Hamza just threw in $25. He says, people will look for any reason to say Christianity is bad. What they fail to see is what God is all about and who Jesus is. They are looking to justify their behavior so they don't have to be accountable, just like Adam and Eve. Amen. Amen to that, Jay Hamza. God bless you, brother. You're spot on. And thank you so much for the support. God bless you and your family. Let me check Streamlabs real quick. Doesn't look like anything on Streamlabs. And Screwed Up Texas just gifted $5 on YouTube. Says, God bless you, brother. All glory to God. All glory to God. Guys, make it to your nativity service tonight, nativity liturgy. God bless you all. Glory be to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And I hope you guys have a wonderful time with friends and family today. So I will see you guys the day after Christmas. The Father, Deacon, Dr. Ananias and I will be live to discuss whether animals are rational or not. So Father Deacon mentioned in his Philosophy 101 class that apparently this was coming up multiple times by students who refuse to believe that only humans can be rational. So we're going to be going over the philosophical justification of why only Homo sapiens, humans, mankind, is fully rational and why animals are not fully rational. And then we'll be getting back to some of the usual content for this channel. I'll be doing Scottish realism, potentially Friday or Sunday. And then we'll be doing the Romanian eschatology book, Elders on the End Times, and a bunch of fun stuff moving forward. So anyways, God bless you all. Merry Christmas to you and your families. Enjoy today and tomorrow. And I'll see you guys in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.